DC Comics superheroes might be some of the most iconic, but not all heroes at DC have power sets that are winners. And even those that do don't always have powers that make sense. Oh boy. When it comes to Power Girl, her powers are odd in the way that they are restricted, let's say, or at least how they used to be restricted. Specifically, we're talking about her power of invulnerability here. She can't be harmed by anything really, because, well, invulnerable. Except sometimes natural materials? So I'm pretty sure that, like her Atlantean heritage, which was also a thing at one point in her origins history, seriously, this happened, you can look it up, this restriction and weakness was also retconned out of existence, but there was a time where if Power Girl got into a fight and someone threw a stick or a stone at her hard enough, it could literally break her bones, as this was her one vulnerability. Very strange. What do you think are some just like weird powers in terms of restrictions that exist? Sometimes there are just things that I'm like, but why? I think it says it all when you belong to a team with the words substitute heroes in the title. Dag Wentham is known as Stone Boy, and he belongs to the team known as the Legion of, yes, substitute heroes. He is an alien from the planet Zwen who can transform into a stone form, becoming super strong and durable. Sounds pretty cool, right? But this also immediately makes him, unable to move. Not super useful in combat if you want to, I don't know, do anything other than just survive, I guess. Let me put it another way. Stone Boy has also not been spotted since the New Earth continuity. I think that tells you just how ridiculous his abilities are. So ridiculous that we can't even seem to find a place for him in the massive universe that is the Prime Earth continuity. And this is even after he finally manages to gain some ability in a possible future to move somewhat while in his stone form post 0 hour. Zatanna is one of those characters who can do pretty much anything, but even she has rules that she needs to play by, which make her powers kind of a little weird. Case in point, her powers allow her to cast magical spells, and she can do almost anything with those magical spells. Magic is wild in the sense that, yeah, you can do anything you can really imagine, or anything there's a spell for at least, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's easy to do. It has taken, dedication, focus, willpower, years of training, and a natural aptitude for Zatanna to get where she is. And even then, she still has to say all of her spells backwards apparently. Although this might seem like a weird restriction on paper, and yes, you're right, it definitely is. With Zatanna in Justice League Dark, we'd actually learned that the reason that she has to say her spells backwards is because magic, being naturally wild, had to be tamed in some way by rules on Earth. And so that is just one of the rules that was used to prevent it from becoming too chaotic and disrupting the balance in the world. Funny Man is an odd superhero who historically is actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves a spot here on this list. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster after they left DC and they began what would become an epic and a long time legal dispute over the rights to Superman. It's very interesting. If you haven't looked into it, highly recommend. A very fascinating part of comic book history. And honestly, rightfully so. They felt they weren't being fairly paid their dues, and we figured that out, and now that's also why they're always credited whenever we talk about Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to recreate the magic of Superman, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new. Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal and decides to just become a bona fide superhero, cause why not? Using his jokes and his funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end, as the character only lasted, sadly, 6 issues. Oh no. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes also did this by accident. Elasty Woman. I love Rita Farr. She is just one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and honestly of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming permanently stuck in her creepy elastic form when she uses it. But in the comics, Elasty Woman has actually learned to master these abilities abilities. Rita gained her powers while she was a Hollywood actress and was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and her limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs out. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects as well, just by touching them, and the current Prime Earth continuity version of her also has shape-shifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol television series just does like an amazing job of capturing what shapeshifting or what stretching powers would be like in real life, and how they would actually be really scary, like the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects that probably would come with that. So if you also haven't watched Doom Patrol, you should go do it. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol as well, and honestly that is just a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are quite powerful but also super weird. Jane is no exception to that rule, of course. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who actually appeared only a few years before Jane made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue number 19 in the 1987 series created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. The challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her and has demonstrated various levels of control over them. Wildcat initially was boxer Ted Grant, who didn't actually have any superpowers, but instead had amazing fighting prowess. However, over time, as sometimes does happen, he would also gain powers via, well, a curse. It doesn't even sound like a curse based on actually what it did for him. It gave him resurrection powers, but with a weird, oddly thematically fitting limit in regards to his number of lives. He only gets 9 because he's a cat. Get it? He only has 9 lives. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there, honestly, is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue number 57 and has also been known as the Element Man in the comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or his body parts into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though, and at one point we also had Element Girl. The story ended up being quite dark in the end, very bleak actually. But before Sandman happened, she did assist Metamorpho on some of his adventures. Both Element Man and Element Girl are believed to be agents of the Egyptian sun god Ra, Amun-Ra. He created beings that apparently were known as metamorphae, and that's apparently what they are. Aquaman is an interesting character. Oftentimes he is considered to be one of the weakest members of the Justice League, and is often, I would say, the butt of many DC Comics fans' jokes. Maybe a little less now that Jason Momoa was Aquaman recently, but still, at the end of the day, that is a thing that did happen, and I would actually say that Aquaman, when you think about it though, is actually pretty nuts when it comes to his power set, at least in the modern day. I feel like the fact that we used to make fun of him so much seems goofy. Although if we go back, I guess, to some of the more old school rules when it comes to his power set, maybe it is easier to see why so many people considered him kind of weak in comparison to his fellow heroes on the Justice League. One restriction that was pretty weird was that because Aquaman was from Atlantis, he actually needed to be dipped in water periodically, or he would literally dry out, making him useless and putting him in great danger if he was away from water too long. He literally became a fish out of water. However, in the water, very powerful. Now just pretty much powerful all the time, I think. Arm Fall Off Boy has to be one of the weirdest ones out there. Unlike another odd hero, Bouncing Boy, who eventually in the Prime Earth continuity did achieve his dream, Arm Fall Off Boy has never made the cut for the Legion of Superheroes. Sad. And that is saying something, considering that the Legion of Superheroes themselves are a pretty weird superhero team by all definitions. Arm Fall Off Boy has the power to detach his limbs, which he typically then attempts to use to beat his enemies with. And I mean, it is pretty cool that he can like remove his limbs and survive that, but it's also less cool that really all he does from there is like use his arm or his leg as a weapon. Especially as this means now he has like less limbs to actually move around with and use in combat. It's really pretty silly. And so is the onomatopoeia that often is used to describe the sound of his power, which I love. It is plorp. So satisfying, but also very disturbing to read on a page when someone removes their arm. Plorp.
Dead Girl was a mutant with light blue skin, spooky powers, and dreams of fame. Though she appeared regularly throughout the end of X-Force's original run and its continuation, X-Statix, she was constantly overshadowed by her teammates. I can't think of a better way to prepare for Halloween than by chatting about this girlie. Dead Girl first appeared in X-Force 125 in 2002. X-Force members Orphan, You-Go Girl, and Anarchist went to a graveyard to officially recruit Dead Girl into their ranks. Like a good undead character, Rather, she arrived at her first mission wearing tattered clothes and a rope for a belt, so undead casual. However, it was suggested that she was purposely trying to scare her teammates. Though she recounted her past for the team, Dead Girl did not tell them her real name. When Dead Girl was alive, she was an aspiring actor but fell in love with a man who eventually took her life. Her mutant powers manifested when, after the passing, she regained consciousness in a cemetery and realized that she could communicate with her dead cohabitants. The spirits lured the life taker back to the cemetery for her, so Dead Girl pulled him into her grave and made a mattress out of his bones, which is so iconic. While an excellent tale of revenge, much of Dead Girl's origin was still shrouded in mystery. Though she was accepted into X-Force, not even Dead Girl knew the full extent of her powers. She found out quickly, however, that when her body was blown to bits, she could slowly and grossly reform. Dead Girl could also control her dismembered limbs as she choked an enemy with a detached arm. This mutant was creepy and gross and awesome. It was if she came directly from a horror movie into a comic book. The New Mutants had one of the wackiest adventures in superhero history, even by X-Men standards, and the core of those stories from the beginning was Danielle Moonstar. Known as the Mutant Mirage, Dani's powers started out simple enough, if a little mystical and ill-defined, but over the course of her history they would develop, change completely, be lost altogether, and join new powers that had nothing to do with her being a mutant. Starting out as an orphaned girl living on a reservation with her grandfather, Dani experienced precognitive visions of the future and a psychic connection to the animals around her, but her primary power proved to be the ability to craft illusions embodying the fears of those around her that seemed terrifyingly real. While her psychic connection with animals came in handy alongside her teammate Wolfsbane, who could assume a lupine form, Dani took the name Mirage and honed her ability to craft illusions as her primary weapon. Doreen Green, aka Squirrel Girl, is not a typical superhero. She has a unique ability to communicate with squirrels and possesses the agility and strength of her rodent friends. Her seemingly bizarre powers have made her the subject of many jokes, but don't underestimate her. Squirrel Girl has repeatedly proven she's a force to be reckoned with. She has defeated some of the Marvel Universe's most powerful villains, including Thanos. Her unconventional tactics and problem-solving skills have earned her a dedicated fanbase and a reputation as one of Marvel's most enduring and compelling heroes. The world's smartest person with a huge red dinosaur for an ally couldn't be better. Young superhero Luna Lafayette, aka Moon Girl. With her array of gadgets, her bizarre inhuman ability, and her vast intelligence, Moon Girl has the brains to outsmart just about anyone. Primarily aided by her genius-level intelligence when fighting bad guys, Lunella is the smartest person in the world despite her youth. The 10-story tall beast called Devil Dinosaur assists Lunella in battle. Devil Dinosaur possesses human-level intelligence, sharp claws, and a vicious bite, making him a formidable ally. Moon Girl's inhuman ability allows her to swap minds with Devil Dinosaur, but it's not entirely within her control. Several things can trigger the mind swap, such as stress, anger, or hunger. Additionally, they will spontaneously switch brains during the full moon lunar phase. Lunella carries a variety of tools and gadgets invented by herself to aid her heroic pursuits. These devices include a spring-loaded boxing glove and a taser, all bizarre but certainly functional. Every Marvel fan knows the Avengers, but aside from that main team though, there are several other superhero teams that use the word Avengers, and not all of them are so great. The Great Lakes Avengers especially are a team focused primarily on like outsiders and D-list heroes. Big Bertha is one of the most controversial members of this team. In her civilian life, she's a model, Ashley Crawford, but when she wants to, or has to, she can transform into a very obese woman, which didn't sit well with some readers, especially because other characters often make fun of Big Bertha because of her appearance. The good news here is that Big Bertha is incredibly strong and can easily squish a lot of her opponents, and since she looks different in her civilian life, her superhero identity is a well-protected secret, unlike other superheroes who out themselves to the public and then severely regret it later, such as Spider-Man during the Civil War storyline. Still, there are a lot of Marvel heroes who are super strong without the need to transform in such a way, which makes Ashley's power one of the strangest ones. Spring-heeled Jack, also known as just Jack, possesses the extraordinary ability to leap great distances thanks to his incredibly powerful legs. While this power may appear unremarkable compared to some other superheroes, Jack has used his leaping abilities to significantly take down some of the most formidable villains in the entire DC universe. Despite being a lesser-known hero, Jack's acrobatic skills and unparalleled agility have proven valuable assets in combat, allowing him to evade attacks and strike from unexpected angles. With his unique power and impressive combat skills, Spring-heeled Jack is a hero not to be underestimated. Dog Welder, aka also a Jack, is one of the most bizarre superheroes with a disturbing and intriguing ability. As the name suggests, his power involves welding dead dogs to people's faces, which is not for the faint of heart. Despite the grotesque nature of his power, Dog Welder has used it effectively to take down criminals and other villains, making him a valuable asset to his team. While his methods may seem extreme, his dedication to justice cannot be denied, and he is a reminder that even the weirdest powers can be used for good. Johnny D has my least favorite mutation that I've ever seen, and also the strangest mutation I've ever seen, a sentient maw attached to him. It's right in the middle of his chest, and Johnny has named it the Freak. The Freak produces voodoo dolls. To get a doll, Johnny must feed the maw a DNA sample, like hair. The maw will spit out the doll, and Johnny will get full, absolute control over that person. Now, I'm sure that getting people's DNA is probably really annoying, but once you have it and you have the doll, there is nothing Johnny can't do. As it stands, there isn't anyone that he can't control if he has their doll. There is a theory that Johnny is not the mutant, but that the maw is the mutant, and that it's just attached to a normal Johnny. The Freak does have its own brain, so it's a very real possibility, but they're literally attached, so Johnny, mutant or not, you might as well be. Johnny happened to be one of the only mutants to keep his mutation after M-Day, and can I just say, I would be so mad. Imagine learning that hundreds of mutants lost their powers, but you were still stuck with your chest maw, a chest maw that once tried to hurt you. That would be the start of my villain arc. Personally, Johnny is stronger than me. Jack Hawksmoor can either be the most powerful hero on the battlefield or the weakest, and it depends entirely on one odd factor: the size of the city he's in. Hawksmoor of the Wildstorm universe experiences a symbiotic link with whatever city he's in. The bigger the city, the more powerful he is. In fact, if Jack were to exist outside a large urban center for long, he would literally pass away, so it's imperative that he lives somewhere like New York. The reason Hawksmoor is like this is because time-traveling scientists used him as a lab rat, and he is now more alien organs and foreign objects than human. Jack's city-sanctioned powers are the stuff that you would usually see, like enhanced senses, the ability to stick to walls and also phase himself and others through walls, sometimes fatally to his enemy. Then he also has traditional superpowers with like a city spin on them, like he's capable of telepathy, but with buildings. He can also go up to a window or a mirror and see everything it has seen, almost like it's a personal security camera. He also uses windows and mirrors as a form of teleportation, stepping into one and out another. One time in Jenny Sparks' The Secret History of the Authority, Jack literally turned the entire city of Tokyo into a giant battlesuit to fight Kansas City, which also gained sentience for some reason. A final fun bit about Jack's powers is whatever city he's in, he speaks every language spoken in that city, and that is pretty powerful in itself.
Alan Scott is the original Green Lantern, the original powerhouse of the Justice Society, and he is the most unique of the human heroes to gain the Green Lantern title, in my opinion. Alan's ring is unique as it is powered by the Star Heart, a repository of magical energy made by the Guardians of the Universe. This allows him to do things like releasing Eldritch Blasts. His ring also has an inexplicable vulnerability to wood, but for me, what makes Alan Scott a little extra weird is that his ring transformed him into an energy being. Alan Scott absorbed the Star Heart into himself after years of using it, basically becoming it himself. Unfortunately, this raises like a lot of questions. How did it turn him into energy? He internalized the power source, but that shouldn't have made him energy. How does he get hurt when his corporeal form is now just his own concept of who he is? He should just now be completely invincible, but that doesn't seem to be the case. As a being of energy, he can kind of just make the rules whatever he wants them to be, and I guess the rules are that he can get hurt. Now, despite his incredibly confusing continuity, Hawkman and Hawkgirl are both characters I have always thought were just kinda super cool. I mean, look at them and those giant wings. It's awesome, but it's actually not the wings that allows them to fly. Hawkman actually achieves lift and actually most of his powers thanks to his nth metal belt and boots. Nth metal has psycho-reactive electromagnetic and gravitational properties, so when he wills it, the nth metal will use anti-gravity to grant him lift. The wings then then provide the thrust and the maneuverability. Where it gets weird is how the nth metal provides his other powers, notably super strength, super durability, super vision, and a healing factor. Gravitational properties could totally help him with the super strength, allowing him to probably negate an object's mass. Sure, but I can't really think of any way to explain the durability, which usually accompanies strength, the supervision, and most of all, the healing factor. All of those abilities are gained from his nth metal, but it makes no sense. Now, many a time have I spoken about Elongated Man, who somehow managed to gain his abilities by consuming a certain fruit. His origin is pretty ridiculous, but when it comes to stretching heroes, only one has really gone to the point of making absolutely no sense, and his name is Plastic Man. Plastic Man is known to the nerdy community for being one of the most surprisingly powerful superheroes DC Comics has. After being exposed to unknown chemicals, Plastic Man gained the ability to manipulate his own body on a molecular level, meaning he has complete control over its shape, size, and density. He's able to alter his size, which I'm not even going to go into that, but he's also been able to stretch his limbs, transform into other people or objects, allowing him to do things like fly and increase his strength. He's practically invulnerable and immortal and can regenerate if he does get hurt. That is all fine. Where it goes completely off the rails is when this guy turns himself into things like a working aeroplane and a space rocket. So now he can just change the actual chemical makeup of his body, produce fuel, and create combustion? Nah. Next up, Martian Manhunter is one of my actual favorite superheroes. He's super cool. He's so, how you say, mysterious. Just like some of his powers. Martian Manhunter is like a Swiss army knife. He's super strong and durable on the level of Superman. He can fly, he has shape-shifting powers, which also somehow allows him to increase or decrease his size, which irks me to no degree. He has some of the strongest telepathy on the entire planet, and while still being super durable and strong, he can also be completely intangible. He can fire extremely powerful beams of mysterious energy out of his eyes that are pretty much the same as Superman's, except not powered by the sun, and we have no idea where that amount of energy is actually coming from. And while also having all those other abilities, he can also go completely invisible. Not just blending into the background, but legit invisible. I love him because of how powerful he is while also having his personality, but sometimes it feels like he was just given powers to make him a backup Superman. So as most fans of DC Comics know, Kryptonians are wildly powerful. Superman and his entire race are godlike aliens who have a very limited number of weaknesses. Most Kryptonians are similar in other universes as well. Superman's cousin Supergirl is entirely the same when it comes to her powers and weaknesses, if not on different levels based on experience and all that jazz. But Supergirl has a multiversal counterpart in the form of Power Girl, who is basically the exact same person but from Earth 2. But for some reason, this Kryptonian from Earth 2 has all her invulnerabilities reduced to nothing in the face of a pointy enough twig. It was revealed that Power Girl is vulnerable to raw, unprocessed materials, meaning she is vulnerable to both wood and rocks. Do you hear how ridiculous that is? Raw, unprocessed materials make up almost the entire natural world. The weirdest thing about this is that no other Kryptonians from Earth 2 share this weakness. It's just Power Girl, and it didn't even last forever. Next up is Metamorpho. Metamorpho is an elemental superhero with the power to transmute his body into various forms using different periodic elements that were found in the human body. Now, originally known as the archaeologist Rex Mason, he was exposed to the Orb of Ra in Egypt, and it changed him into one of the mythical metamorphi. That, or he was exposed to the energy of an ancient meteorite. Either one. So yeah, his powers are mostly mythical and somewhat magical, which makes arguing with them in any way kinda pointless, but that's never stopped me before. Now, when he first appeared, Metamorpho was only able to change his body into and use elements that were already found within the human body. And if anything is going to make sense, then that is probably the thing that does make sense. But what's weird is that a part of Metamorpho's body managed to separate and form a duplicate of Metamorpho, and it started calling itself Rufus, aka Shift. For some reason, Shift could manipulate all elements, not just the ones inside the human body. And eventually, when Metamorpho reabsorbed Shift into himself, he also gained that power boost. That is the problem I have with Metamorpho, not the endless list of other things that he can do. Next up, the Red Bee isn't particularly outstanding. Rick Rally is just a guy in a suit who fights crime, usually with a stinger ray which he can effectively use against enemies. That is what it is. Can't argue with it. A dude in a suit with a taser. Cool. What is outstanding to the point of being almost completely unbelievable is that Red Bee has figured out how to train bees. Red Bee can use his favorite bee, who is named Michael, for spying and infiltration, but he was also said to have trained many other bees other than Michael. It's just that Michael is the only truly talented of his bees who has also learned or developed the ability to use his stinger multiple times without tearing his own body apart and going to bee heaven. Rick can find another genius bee to replace Michael if Michael expires. There is no further explanation, and I personally don't need one. Sounds pretty self-explanatory to me. Training bees. Now, Friendly Fire is a member of the superhero group called the All-Star Section 8. He has the power to project energy blasts from his fists. That's cool. At least maybe it would be if he was anyone else, but he is Friendly Fire, and Friendly Fire is a special case. It may be kind of redundant to say that his ability makes no sense because, yeah, he is kind of a joke character, but Friendly Fire never hits his intended target with any of his attacks, and what's worse is that no matter how hard he tries, he always accidentally hits innocent people, and more often than not, specifically his friends and allies. What's crazy is that even when he really tried, he still managed to not only blow off his own head, like straight up, but he even managed to still hit his own ally, Defenestrator. The question I like to ask myself is if this is actually an accident. Is this just gross negligence? Is he really just that bad at aiming, or is this an actual legit byproduct of his power? Does his power actually force him to never hit his target? Am I asking a pointless question? Yes, but you asked for this. Or maybe you didn't. I don't know. If you want to talk about heroes that are just completely wacky and nonsensical, we don't need to look any further than the Doom Patrol. And for our runner-up spot, we're looking at Danny the Street, a living sentient street who can teleport to any city in the world. He was first introduced in Doom Patrol Volume 2 number 35 in 1990, and his main purpose and drive in this world is to bring happiness to those who inhabit whatever city he is currently set up in, giving those who have nowhere to go a place to rest their heads. Now, I want it to be known that I love Danny. He is incredibly wholesome. He likes to cross-dress and dress himself in a nice pink frilly decorations on some of his buildings. He can communicate through signs and billboards, but he cannot actually speak himself. He eventually became the headquarters of Doom Patrol, and at one point he grew to be Danny the World, which was an entire planet, yes, and then at another point he was deconstructed down to Danny the Brick. And one time he was even just the humble Danny the Alley. Do I even need to say why this makes no sense? I don't think I do. And finally, are your superpowers not making any sense? Well, I have an easy fix for you. Just tag on the word mystery and that should solve your problems. I'm assuming that's what Flex Mentallo did when he described his superpower of muscle mystery. Flex here has the absolutely insane ability to manipulate reality in a whole handful of ways simply by flexing different muscles. Now, I'm not going to argue with this much. For starters, Flex was created from a drawing. That's how he came into reality, so there is really no basis for me to even start to justify anything about him and his abilities. By flexing different muscles, Flex can do some relatively normal superhero things like gaining super strength, durability, and all that jazz, but he can also flex muscles in order to, I don't know, survive and travel in the vacuum of space, or fly, or travel dimensions, or create energy constructs, or control his own pheromones, or control people's minds, or see the future, or even use telepathy and telekinesis, and you just kinda have to accept it, because that's the way it is.
There are a lot of shapeshifters out there, but there are none that are quite like Ice Cream. Ice Cream is a mutant whose abilities allow him to turn into ice cream. That's it. That's what he can do. He was once a villain who was jealous of the X-Men and sought to take them down because their powers were a lot cooler than his. He felt that the X-Men made him look bad, running around doing cool stuff with all their cool powers. Admittedly, I think I would agree with him. However, how he thought he was going to take down the entire X-Men team with powers that simply allowed him to turn into ice cream, I do not know. Needless to say, it did not go well for Ice Cream in that endeavor. Is Ice Cream the villain with the weirdest powers? Let me know other villains that you feel like have very bizarre, unexplainable powers. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, they are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you'd expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's so specific. So finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers. Doorman's powers allow him to create in essence a doorway to, or a door between adjacent areas that are separated by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and much less useful in others. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird, let's be real. His power relates to the fact that he is actually made of pure psionic energy. When his powers first manifested as a result, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face, blowing off his jaw. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. Jono, as a result, no longer needed to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood even did not need to course through his veins to keep him alive. As such, he is typically seen with a scarf or some other clothing covering the lower half of his face, and he communicated telepathically as his jaw was blown off when his powers first emerged. Zeitgeist is known for his weird power, which when it first manifested, scarred the face of a young woman he happened to be making out with at the same time. His power is that he can produce acidic vomit, which I'm not really sure how you could best utilize that if you were fighting in a battle, and it would definitely make for quite the hazard if you just had the flu and you were feeling, you know, super unwell, super nauseous. Zeitgeist does wear a protective mouthpiece to help prevent any other dangerous cases from happening, which is good because Zeitgeist's acid vomit is powerful enough that it can actually burn through, get this, solid steel. He is somewhat more durable than your normal mortal human, which of course makes sense if you were someone who can vomit, you know, that level of acid. You'd have to be fairly durable to even be able to do that, to even be able to make that acid and live. Axel Clooney is a mutant and used to be the leader of the X-Force at one point, but more recently led the rival team to X-Statix known as the Excellent. I honestly love Brew, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Brew may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the others that are out there. Brew's mutant power and mutation actually made him compassionate, which for a Brood is actually a superpower really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy like humans do, but for an X-Men, well, it's a little less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive for a Brood, compassion is, like I said, it's pretty amazing to have as an ability, as Brood are typically unable to feel this emotion at all. And currently, Brew is also king of the Brood, so hey, there's also that. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first superhero civil war. In the comics, this was similar to but different from the Sokovia Accords that we saw in the MCU. Similar in the sense that many people died, many of them in the case of the comic civilians, different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show. One person, Nitro, went off, killing a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to survive the incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, inward spikes. spikes. As many spikes as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Not all mutants get to be as badass as folks like Vulcan or Storm. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more of a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird and also make him built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even fly. Beak has since figured out how to fly, or rather glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go very short distances, and even going short distances he doesn't really have a ton of like tactical flying skills to speak of either. Like, he's no angel, you know? Fortunately though, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of it is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a thin, tall runway supermodel. Ashley of course can transform from bigger to smaller as well, but to do so she actually has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic, to put it lightly. More recently in the comics, Marvel tried to redeem the character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Bertha around in the comics for some time. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge to either run away or run towards someone. Yeah, he's basically the game Tag incarnate. He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run away would just simply stop, so it's also got weird restrictions, to be honest. I mean, I guess you gotta have restrictions somewhere, right? Phantom X has to be one of the weirdest characters in all of Marvel Comics. He has a lot of powers that are strange, but one of the strangest is that his nervous system can turn into a flying ship. It can turn into a flying ship. His nervous system also has a name and also even has pronouns. She is known as Eva, which is technically an acronym. Eva can separate herself from Phantom X and turn into a ship controlling herself, so she can fly herself around. And Phantom X can also sometimes control Eva, but it requires a lot of focus for him to do that. At first, she's not sentient, but can become a separate entity still, but as time goes on, she evolves and she changes. And even at one point when Phantom X seemingly dies, she herself turns into a humanoid being and does end up developing sentience. Eva also seems to have a symbiotic connection to Phantom X in the sense that if she is hurt, Phantom X can typically feel it. However, while she is separate from Phantom X, this means that he doesn't actually have a nervous system himself. All in all, Eva seems to be one of the weirdest powers, one of the weirdest things that I've just ever heard of. Not just within Marvel, but within maybe all of comics. Definitely up there for me.
Jessica Drew's Spider-Woman gained her powers from a serum based on arachnid blood and a genetic accelerator created by the High Evolutionary. While she gained some abilities that make sense for a spider, super strength and wall crawling abilities like Spider-Man, she also gained other powers that make, like, no sense. Drew gained venom blasts. Now this wasn't venom like when you get bit by a poisonous spider. Similar to Miles Morales, her body possesses an inordinate amount of bioelectricity that she has learned to channel and discharge through her hands in controlled bursts that vary in power from being able to stun a person's nervous system to being able to completely take their lives. Now, I'm not really complaining that much because I like how her and Miles use this ability, and it is pretty darn cool. All I'm saying is that I don't know any spiders personally that can discharge bioelectricity, and I should know because I asked Google. Funnily enough though, spiderwebs are able to conduct some electricity, so little fun fact for you. There you go. But But while we're on the topic of spider people who call themselves Spider-Woman, the second Spider-Woman was Julia Carpenter, who gained her powers when Valerie Cooper had her join an athletic study that saw Julia doused with a mixture of spider venom and plant extracts. That's cool. This isn't about weird ways people gain their powers. The problem is that a chunk of Julia's main powers were psionic in nature. She used psionics in order to wall crawl and fire psionic webs. According to the wiki, by using psychokinetic energy, she can, quote, bind ambient free-floating molecules into strands of solid force. She can do most of the same things Spider-Man can do with these webs, including webbing up bad guys and even swinging. But then, her psi webs can also be used in ways Spider-Man's webs never could, such as causing webs to form from a distance or controlling the movement of her webbing mentally. It's always been just like a tiny little bit weird and ridiculous, but the main question I have about it is just, why? David Haller, or as he came to be known, Legion, was living in Paris with his mother when her home was invaded by a team of assassins. They took out David's stepfather before his eyes, which kicked off his latent psionic powers, which he used to incinerate the brains of the assassins. As he did that, he also made telepathic contact with each of his victims, thus experiencing their thoughts and emotions as they were incinerated, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected David and forced him into a catatonic state. Now, this event had splintered David's personality into multiple alters, with each of these alters controlling a different psionic power. David became an Omega level mutant able to create spontaneous mutations of different kinds that are accompanied by new personas or alters to govern each of these new mutations. Now, David himself stated that he had 200 Omega level split personalities, and originally all of Legion's powers were psychically based, but since his resurrection, Legion has also manifested physical mutations, and his mind is shown as being inhabited by thousands of alters. Now obviously, this is not at all how personality disorders work, at all, and it makes very little sense that new powers just kind of form, but man, if the character is not incredibly complex and interesting, so it's perfectly fine. It is actually fine, it's cool. Now while you may think that the power of Bruce Banner to turn into a big old rage monster with infinite strength and durability who can shake the literal multiverse with his punches is pretty unrealistic and maybe makes no sense, it's actually the Hulk's ability to see ghosts that has always confused me. The Hulk persona has the ability to see astral projections and ghosts, and he can even interact with them if he chooses to. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender. Now, as with most of Bruce Banner's issues, this is because of his father. Bruce subconsciously feared his father's ghosts would come back to haunt him. Like literally come back to haunt him, and so the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost. There isn't really more to it than that. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's actually been suggested that Bruce has a diminished ability to see these ghosts when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk. Now next up, I'm going to talk about Wolverine's healing factor, because seriously, WTF. I love Wolverine's healing factor. It's an awesome ability and it makes him so much more compelling, but that thing has not only been wildly inconsistent, it has also stopped making sense way long ago. Back in the day, Wolverine would be able to heal from flesh wounds and other relatively minor injuries almost instantly, with bigger injuries usually taking quite a bit longer to recover from. But that's changed, especially with more modern stories and people kinda just accepting it as part of his character. Now, almost all injuries heal pretty instantly and aren't even a problem for the little guy. But even more than that, injuries that have either threatened to or literally have sent him on a one-way trip to the big guy upstairs in the past are just a walk in the park for the mutant now. I like that Wolverine seems to survive almost anything. It's cool, and I get that his healing factor has been enhanced or diminished for certain stories, but I don't know, sometimes you can poke holes in comic book logic, that's just how it works. Now, a lot of people in the comments of the last video had something to say about me choosing Thumbelina because I said that she shouldn't be able to retain her full strength at that tiny little size. And I stand by that. It doesn't compute for me. But what about all the Ant-Men? What about Wasp? Those guys mostly get a free pass because they have the magical Pym particles that magically allow them to retain their mass at shrunken sizes. It's actually science, but whatever. Fine, whatever. But how the heck do Wasp's wings work? Do Pym Particle's magical mass effects also affect her wings somehow? I'm sure there is some kind of comic book explanation somewhere out there, but logically, there is absolutely no way those tiny little wings should be able to lift Wasp, who I shall remind you, retains her full-grown mass at her miniature size. I'll give you the Wasp being able to punch out a full-grown man at a minuscule size due to her mass being the same. There you go. But don't you dare tell me in the same breath that those minuscule little wings are somehow creating enough lift to allow the weight and mass of a full-grown superwoman to fly. But okay, let's bounce right off that and talk about Hank Pym. So he's been using these Pym particles to shrink himself down while retaining his mass. Cool. Whatever. So, explain to me what happens when he gets bigger. Please tell me he retains his same mass. If that is the case, he should not be able to do the stuff that he does. He should not be super strong. If he is retaining the same mass, then his muscles are not getting any denser, which is the only way he would get stronger. Now, if you're going to tell me that as he grows, his muscles do get denser and he increases in mass, then there is almost no way he should be able to realistically move, especially not with the speed at which he sometimes does. Now I promise you, Ant-Man, and all you other shrinking and or growing heroes, I promise you, I will bring you down. Your entire empire of pseudoscience lies right down on your heads. I swear it. Okay. Cool. Enough about the tiny little people. Now we talk about a king of Atlantis. Namor the Submariner has many things about his character and abilities that give one pause, but most of it is kind of hand-waveable, and that's because Namor's kinda cool. He's a jerk, but he's kinda cool. What I refuse to just wave off, what I refuse to turn a blind eye to, is those ridiculous ankle wings. Nah. Absolutely not. If the Wasp's little micro wings shouldn't be able to lift her normal mass, then there is no way in all the 7 seas that Namor can generate lift with his flimsy little ankle wings. Generating lift is one thing, but then His Royal Highness actually moves with some significant speed. He is able to fly at the speed of escape velocity when exerting himself fully, and at normal levels he is able to fly faster than military aircraft. Just no. The Marvel Wiki even makes note of the fact that those little winglets could never let him fly that fast, so it's suggested that he flies by some other means and uses the wings to steer. I'll tell you how he flies. BS. That's how. A big pile of BS. Now, there are a lot of characters in comics who have access to energy-based powers. It's been a thing for a long time, but there is a big difference to being able to use energy and being energy. The Avenger known as Wonder Man is a being of ionic energy. This energy gives him insane levels of superhuman strength, invulnerability, effective immortality, energy manipulation, and all that fun stuff. He is not a big old meat sack like the rest of us. He stated during an incident in which all the living things in New York had been morphed into symbiotes that he was an ion being, and it was the prime reason that he himself had not been infected. Wonder Man's physical form is purely subjective. What shape or form he takes is ruled by conscious thought, but funnily enough, he still has a healing factor that lets him survive very physical attacks. And funnily enough, in his early days, almost all of his abilities were physical in nature. I like Wonder Man. I just see some rather interesting things here. That's all I'm saying. And finally, Wanda Maximoff is problematic in many different ways. She has used her abilities to rewrite history and the state of the entire world, and she's used them to rob millions of mutants of their own powers. She's materialized entire alien invasion forces, made people intoxicated when they were not, and that was all mainly due to a thing called the Life Force retcon. When Wanda first appeared, she had the ability to alter probability, and then she gained access to chaos magic. Now, once you put the word magic in there, you can basically just throw all the logic out the window and just smile and nod. She is a magical character, so all realism is automatically suspended. Like other magical Marvel characters, she can call on divine empowerment, she can do almost anything, really. It's just that Wanda will go from being like just the Scarlet Witch to basically a godlike being without much warning or explanation, depending on who is writing her. It's just really hard to get a thumb on what her actual capability is, because one minute she can alter her entire reality, and the next she needs a power boost. It's hard to know where her baseline is, so maybe this point isn't so much about her powers not making sense logically, but that they just need to be a little bit better defined.
I thought I knew it all when it came to Superman, but I had my mind absolutely blown today. The Silver Age was a weird time for the Man of Steel. In addition to his usual superpowers of flight, super strength, invulnerability, heat vision, and super breath, writers often gave him a plethora of bizarre powers for individual stories. Whether it was using super muscular control to change his face's appearance, or using his super mind to telepathically control others, the pre-crisis Superman could seemingly do anything. You heard me right, I think it was in Action Comics issue 55 and various Golden Age stories, this guy couldn't just change the shape of his face, but in some cases his entire body. In early adventures he used to disguise himself as a disgraced sports player, an alien creature, all of which begs a pretty obvious question. Why on earth would he rely on a pair of nondescript glasses to hide his identity when he could just change his face? That's gonna stick with me. One of his most bizarre powers was the super kiss. Look folks, consent is a beautiful thing, and this is a weird gray area that launched my eyebrows into space faster than you could say kryptonite. Superman first used the super kiss in Action Comics issue 306, when he planted one on Lois Lane so hard it left her dizzy, flushed, and sweating profusely in the middle of the Daily Planet's Christmas party. While the rest of the planet's staff wondered why Lois couldn't suddenly walk, Clark was like, I'm going to congratulate myself on my secret tongue talents. His tonsil hockey talents were then showcased in Superman 2 when he planted a kiss on Lois to make her forget that they had shacked up in the Fortress of Solitude for a couple of weeks. Thankfully, this creepy superpower hasn't been seen since, because I'd be freaking out if it did. Has anyone ever counted how many versions of Wolverine's claws there have been over the years? They're one of the deadliest weapons in the Marvel Universe, and over the course of the character's history, he's seen nearly as many upgrades, alterations, alternate versions, and imitations of his claws as he changes his ever-shifting backstory. Of course, as the saying goes, some Wolverines are more deadly than others. The Fireclaw's version of Wolverine, imbued with the powers of Ghost Rider, not only looks amazing, but the idea of being slashed with those flaming claws is legitimately nightmarish. Considering the absolute havoc these claws have the potential to wreak, anyone coming face to face with this iteration of Wolverine is in major peril, including, a lot of folks. While the relative deadliness of some characters versus others can and should be debated, it is inarguable that a Wolverine with claws made of literal burning hellfire is one of the most dangerous creations in comic lore. Also, don't confuse them with his hot claws, which is a version that glows white and is super hot, and takes the deadliness to an entirely unparalleled level. Aside from being able to cut through anything and everything, this Wolverine would need to do little more than gently poke the average person with even the tip of one of his claws, and it would result in their immediate death. In the same vein as the Fire Claws, the Hot Claws have the edge, because while the Fire Claws could possibly be difficult to be precise with, the Hot Claws allow Wolverine to be as meticulous with his kills as ever. Ooh! While we're on the topic of fire, did anybody know that Luke Cage can actually make fire? So ever since the popular show came out on Netflix, we all love him. We first saw him in the Jessica Jones show, then he got his own show, and we were like, heck yes. We know he's superhumanly strong, and being injured doesn't really faze him, but he can create fire. So in one scene we see him walk out of his bar, on fire, he's unharmed, but what we don't see is him being able to rub his hands together, create enough friction, and make flames. Okay, imagine this. If Luke Cage holds, say, a pencil or a stick of wood, then by sliding the wood through his hands, the wood would catch fire because of friction. It's the same premise as cavemen making fire, or how Tom Hanks made it in the movie Castaway. Luke's ability to make fire could have aided him in several situations, or just like, could be fun for a campfire. Okay, either I fell asleep during the Thor movies, or I just somehow completely missed his pet goats? Curse you MCU for taking away an element of this character that would only serve to make him more of a Disney princess than he already is. Much of Thor's powers and arsenal comes straight out of Norse mythology. There's of course his weapon, and his much more infrequently used Belt of Strength that temporarily imbues him with even greater strength. Then there's his mystical chariot, which he can instantly summon to travel in between the 9 worlds. The chariot is unique because it's driven by 2 large goats. Both of them have been shown to be extremely intelligent in various comics. Once Odin used the goats to summon reinforcements, while another time they saved Asgard's offspring when the city was attacked by invaders. One mythological aspect that hasn't carried over is that Thor often eats the goats before battle and then resurrects them the following day using Mimicry. okay, never mind that comment earlier about Disney princess energy. Eating your own pets is more Disney villain category, and super weird. Oh, you know what? I know what I was thinking when I said Disney princess, and somebody forgot to tell me that Wonder Woman can talk to animals. Yes, I know, all her abilities are super cool, but talking to animals is so precious. And we've been robbed of that on screen. Technically, we saw a bit of this during Linda Carter's run as the DC heroine when she was shown speaking with a bird in one episode, and it's been a prominent Wonder Woman ability in the comics as well. So since she's a favorite of Zeus and other gods, these Greek gods granted Diana several superhuman abilities, and among them, the power to communicate with animals. So in the comics, you can see her speaking with like all types of creatures, tigers, lions, you name it. It's unlikely we'll get to see Wonder Woman speak to animals on the big screen anytime soon, since DC is restructuring at the moment, but despite being a rather obscure superpower among fans, it's so cool! Okay, let's move away from the big guys for a moment and focus on a personal favorite hero, or villain depending on your point of view, Homelander. So in the boys comics, his powers include heat vision, super strength, durability, flight, super hearing, and enhanced vocal cords. He also ages more slowly than a normal human thanks to Compound V. He also has X-ray vision, which enables him to see through anything except for stuff that has zinc, which, haha, I see that Superman nod. But in the show, I don't think we've really seen any reference to his enhanced vocal cords yet, or maybe I'm totally having a mind blank. Maybe that's something we can hope for in season 4, since it's almost here. Okay. Back to Marvel we go, with everything you forgot you knew about Captain America. Cap was the third Marvel superhero to be brought into the MCU. Iron Man and Thor both made very strong appearances, but the story of Steve Rogers becoming the big hero he is today was heartwarming to a lot of fans. There's a reason he's my favorite MCU soup, and the only one I've technically cosplayed. Through his trilogy and the Avengers films, we get to see a lot of his abilities like super strength, healing, speed, and more. One thing we don't get a lot of explanation about is his super heightened vision, which enables him to see further, sharper, and more quickly than normal humans. I feel like this really could have come in handy in more than a few instances, but I guess it was too much to translate on screen. One thing we see but don't really realize is that Cap can literally never get tired. He sleeps and everything, but he is totally immune to fatigue, which really helps you understand how he's so on the go during a fight. Yes, it's a little more subtle, but it's totally worth a mention in my opinion. Seeing as Spidey in the MCU is the third time in recent history that the webhead has made it to the big screen, I'm pretty sure people who aren't Marvel fans know the ins and outs of Spider-Man's most basic abilities. Heck, back when I knew next to nothing about superheroes, I could name a few of them. But today I learned about a handful that I'm surprised haven't been brought to the screen more. One thing we're very rarely shown is his ability to communicate with spiders, similar to how Ant-Man communicates with ants. Since he has all their climbing, webbing, and heightened senses, it adds up. I know arachnophobes everywhere just shuddered, and well, I'm right there with ya. Still weird that someone who is a spider in every other sense of the word hasn't really been seen talking to the creepy little buggers. Okay, how about in the comics, Peter actually has premonitions. As someone who is always fighting crime and evil, I'm betting this comes in handy for not being fired at or injured. I think he might have used this ability in Infinity War, which is why he seemed so panicked and knew he was fading away, but I'm not positive. Hey, Kevin Feige, wanna weigh in? Please? Another curious one that I'm surprised isn't used more, his ability to grow extra limbs. He might be able to do a lot, but extra limbs aren't as helpful of a skill as one might think. I don't think this has happened in the MCU, but back in a 1971 comic, Spider-Man one day woke up with 6 limbs. Eventually he was saved with an antidote made by Dr. Kirk Connors, but damn, I think it's safe to assume he didn't go to high school that day. Oh, and before I forget, at one point in the comics, he actually had fangs and even stingers coming out of his hands. Eventually he realized that it was a bit much. Too much spidery and less human, so he was like, okay, we're done. Which, smart move, dude. One lesser known ability about Loki is that the guy can freaking fly. His power of manipulation allows him to levitate, meaning that, technically speaking, he can fly! I'm not sure why he didn't pull this trick out while standing off with Thanos. Come on. Another surprising one, he has super speed abilities. As half frost giant, he has amazingly quick reflexes, thinking abilities, and agility, which means he can probably take down anybody he wants, he just doesn't want to. Ooh, almost forgot. He doesn't look like it with his lean figure, but he has super strength, just like Thor. Okay, he might not be as strong as Thor, but he's still a god and a frost giant, making him far stronger than any mortal human. As a trickster, he uses more of his intellectual powers than brute strength, so we don't get to see him lifting up a car or a building. But he can. Okay, how about I end today with a supervillain just to change things up? Did y'all know that Elektra was able to control minds? Context, Maxwell Dillon was working as an electrical engineer, but when he was repairing a power line, he was struck by lightning, and that transformed him into Electro, one of Spider-Man's most dangerous villains and a member of the Sinister Six. With the ability to create and manipulate electricity, one of his hidden powers is the ability to Mind control. Theoretically, since Electro can manipulate electric currents, he is able to control a person's brain by controlling their neurons. Neurons, or nerve cells, are cells in the brain that transmit and process data through electric signals. It's possible that in that attempt, Electro could fry somebody's brain, but if he focuses just right, Electro could easily be confused for a telepath. One of his favorite forms of attacks is to directly electrocute someone with electric energy blasts, but little does he know that the fight could be over without him breaking a single sweat.
Being an intergalactic god, traveling from realm to realm, planet to planet, galaxy to galaxy, it's pretty crucial that you be able to communicate with the many different life forms you come into contact with. For Thor, other Asgardians, as well as other deities, they do this by way of the All-Speak. Probably through some form of magic, all form of speech is heard in whatever native tongue the listener is accustomed to. Obviously, this is incredibly useful, especially for those who travel far and wide. As such, other superheroes have had various forms of this kind of omni-speech. The mutant Cypher has the ability to communicate in almost all forms of communication, even being able to speak to the living island Krakoa, speaking in binary code to a robot, which makes no sense, reading body language or architecture, or even spellcasting. The Man-Thing in Marvel Comics spoke in Excelsior, which was apparently a universal language. Communication is the basis of society, so naturally, this is making the list. Have you ever wished that you could turn into a puddle? Probably not, but you might want to reconsider that, especially if you're a puddle that can move on its own accord and take various shapes. There are many characters who can achieve a liquid or liquid-like form, and they have used it to great effect. There are characters like Clayface from DC and Sandman from Marvel that, while they are technically turning into mud or sand, they can do some insane things like shapeshift, travel via the air, turn their limbs into hammers, melt away. A lot of the stretching heroes like Plastic Man or Mr. Fantastic can do this to a degree as well. Most shapeshifting characters can make themselves almost liquid, and it allows them to achieve quite a bit more than you'd think. Some other examples would be like the mutant Mercury, Brainiac from DC Comics, or even the T-1000 from Terminator. Next up is dimensional storage. While this kind of power is more often just used as a trope in television and comic books where characters pull objects from seemingly out of nowhere, it has also been used as an actual legit power, and it's all a result of spatial manipulation and or dimensional travel. We have seen this ability used by all sorts of characters, from the wizards of Harry Potter with their tents, buildings, or bags, to characters like Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim who pull a massive hammer out of a tiny little purse. In DC Comics, Green Lanterns store their lantern batteries in a pocket dimension from which they recall it when they need to recharge their rings, and for Marvel, the mutant Abyss houses a portal to an unknown dimension that he can freely pull objects in and out of. Deadpool has been known to use this trick from time to time, although it's hardly ever explained. Then of course most characters with cartoon physics do this too. These pocketed dimensions are not limited to any physical location and can be applied almost anywhere, whether it's a portable bag, a pants pocket, a closet, or with a character like the X-Men's Dupe, it's literally inside of him. A hero with this ability can basically store anything, even people, so long as whatever it is fits through the entry point. Reactive adaptation is basically the ability to just adapt to whatever problem you encounter. An Omega level version of this power is possessed by the Marvel mutant Darwin. The mutant Lifeguard has a similar kind of ability, but more focused around healing. Her ability is called Danger Detection Response, and basically what it means is that she can detect danger to her or others' lives in her vicinity, and she can literally evolve whatever powers are necessary for her to stop those lives from being lost. She can gain more than one power at a time and is able to control said power after just a few seconds. It also seems to be kind of limitless in what she or Darwin can do. Ernest Whittle, aka Gold Star, certainly has an odd power. The hero possesses the ability to encourage people to be nice via the niceness vibes that he emits. Now while this might sound useless on paper, just think about it. With his niceness vibes, Goldstar could quell riots or halt robberies and generally just sway people to the side of good en masse, all without throwing a single punch. Functioning essentially as a low-level empath, Goldstar could nice his way through any problem, making him kind of the ultimate pacifist hero. Debuting in Amazing Spider-Man Swing Shift in 2007, Overdrive proved to be a new kind of villain for Spidey, with the power to convert any vehicle into a souped-up, modded-out escape vehicle with just a touch. Overdrive made a career out of playing getaway driver. Overdrive never saw reason to explore the limits of his powers, preferring instead to work on a quick payday and just get away. But with a better understanding of vehicle mechanics and a little imagination, Overdrive could theoretically morph any jalopy into whatever he desired. He could do like a rocket bike, a jet, a monster truck, even brand new vehicles that we haven't even come up with yet. As a member of the Hellions, Tag, aka Brian Cruz, lent his unusual skill to Emma Frost's personal squad. Cruz was born with the mutant ability to tag, wherein Cruz would make physical contact with a person or an object, imbuing whatever is touched with a psionic signature. When Cruz tags something, he can either cause people to run away from the tagged object or person, or he could cause people to swarm it. Despite the odd nature of the power, tagging allows the mutant to function both defensively by tagging civilians or a teammate to cause villains to avoid them, and offensively tagging someone to make people swarm that individual, making tag a real double threat. If Tag had been given time to fine-tune his power, he could use his tagging to like control entire cities or maybe even planets. We don't know. First appearing in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man number 98 in 1985, as a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Jonathan Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. So working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. The power used to create said portal caused a blackout, destabilizing it and prompting Owen to just step into it and pass out. He awoke floating weightlessly in a dimension that was a place of half darkness and half light that contained a large number of portals, and using the original one, he slipped back through to the lab. Now, the portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe that were portable space warps. Throwing a punch at Spot, he'll just move a spot in your way and have you punch yourself in the face. Taking a shot at Spot, prepare for those bullets to come zipping right back at you. Spot is essentially a walking bundle of teleportation, making it next to impossible to actually hurt the guy. This is how he beat up Spider-Man in his first appearance. You compound this with constant moving around via short-range teleportation, and you've got a villain that can really mess you up. Bernard Buddy Baker, aka Animal Man in DC Comics, gained access to the morphogenic field, otherwise known as the Red. This field basically allows Buddy to absorb and use different attributes of nearby animals while still being a human. So he has been able to move his eyes independently like a chameleon, he's been able to ram against a speeding car with the abilities of a rhino, and he can fly by tapping into birds, among many other boons. But Animal Man definitely isn't the only one to be able to tap into the abilities of animals. A lot of Teen Titans fans are well aware of Beast Boy, who has a much more direct version of this power, being able to just turn into different animals. And there's also Vixen, who is much the same as Animal Man, being able to tap into whatever animal she needs to borrow the abilities of. This power, like most, gives more questions than anything else, but if you don't worry about the how, and just worry about what you can do with it, it's pretty cool. Next up is photographic reflexes. This superpower is usually attributed to one character, at least in Marvel Comics. That character would be Tony Masters, otherwise known as Taskmaster. Taskmaster's photogenic reflexes ability allows this guy to watch another person's physical movements and duplicate them without any practice or training, no matter how complex those movements are. Tony is able to duplicate almost any physical activity after seeing it done by someone else only once, even using this ability to master complex gymnastics routines and play different pieces of music. But it goes beyond mere mimicry. He has often shown the ability to actually predict an opponent's next move before they even make it, if he has studied their fighting style enough. Opponents who are skilled at improvisational fighting styles, or who have a more random, unpredictable style, are less likely to have their movements predicted by Taskmaster, of course. But another benefit that comes with his photographic reflexes is that Tony can push his body past its natural limits, meaning his agility and speed can increase itself to match that of other superhumans' speed and agility. It also makes him an excellent teacher, so
Wolverine's healing factor is a mystery. It can make him come back from anything, it seems. It's truly amazing what Wolverine has survived. He survived being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima, being one of the men at the Valentine's Day Massacre, multiple world wars, fighting death, being completely destroyed aside from a single drop of himself. How is he still standing? I don't get it. I think Deadpool explains it best. He survives because he's popular. You can't kill off Wolverine. He's Wolverine. He's iconic. Every time he goes away, we want him back. So is it a a powerful healing factor keeping the hero around, or fan devotion. I'm not complaining though, love our Canadian king, looking forward to seeing Hugh Jackman don the blue and yellow in Wolverine and Deadpool in a few months. Bailey Hoskins is thebomb.com. Literally, he is a bomb. He can blow up, but only once. His power seems ridiculous because that was the point. Bailey debuted in Worst X-Men Ever by Max Bemis. Max wanted to explore what it would be like if someone joined the X-Men that was basically useless until death. Still, you have to wonder, how does Bailey even know how to detonate without ever being able to practice? Is it like breathing? He just knows. How often did he get close to detonation just from sneezing wrong? He got a power suit at one point, but was usually just his human appearing self. His miniseries is cute and pokes fun at the X-Men franchise, so if that's your thing, check it out. Lila Cheney is a rock star and ally to the X-Men. Lila wasn't always a good guy. She did try to steal the Earth once, but she eventually came around. She is capable of intergalactic teleportation. The problem is she can't control it. She also can't travel short distances. It has to be thousands of miles away. I don't understand why. The current explanation is that to teleport she creates a Tachyon field around herself. The field converts matter into particles that are faster than the speed of light. The only thing she can control is what direction she goes in. Apparently once she activates her powers, they just go before she can even think stop. She's already super far away. But in order for her to go anywhere, she needs to specifically know it. If that is the case, shouldn't she just be able to picture her kitchen and go there? To get around the teleportation glitch, she set up a sort of base point, the Dyson sphere. She goes there first, then to her next point, kind of like a plane connection. The other thing is that if her voice is somewhere, she can teleport there. It can cause problems because she is a famous singer, her voice is in a lot of places, but if she has to know specifically where she wants to go, shouldn't just having her voice somewhere not cut it? I don't get it. Ariel the alien is known for her teleportation powers and ability to persuade anyone. You might also recognize her for her bright, over-the-top outfits. She was designed in the 80s and it shows in the most iconic way. The Met Gala is coming up soon and I can't help but think she would fit right in. Ariel is from the planet Coconut Grove and it looks like your average 80s nightclub. All Coconut Grove aliens are capable of teleportation using doors. If there are no doors, too bad. But what I'm confused about is that this ability is apparently not limited to just Coconut Grove residents. It's suggested that anyone could do it if they have the right hands and a good grounding in subjective physics. Has this ever been explored again? I don't think so. Let me know if I'm forgetting something. The only other time I've seen door teleportation like this was in Monsters Inc. In addition to the door powers, Ariel and her family are the mutants of their world, as they are capable of super persuasion. Ariel is described as she who speaks like water running across the stones. Ariel can make people do or think almost anything she wants using her charming, persuasive voice. However, it seems like a lot of the effectiveness is based on what language she uses, how she knows what to use. I don't know, probably lots of trial and error. Ariel ended up in San Francisco and then joined the X-Men and stayed affiliated with the team since. Hector Mendoza has transparent skin. How is that useful? I'm not sure. Maybe for scientists to study the functions of the human body in real time. Hector did have another power and it caused the see-through skin. It was an invisibility field. The unfortunate part was that the invisibility didn't work all the way and his skin turned invisible instead of all of him. I don't really know what would be worse, your mutant ability manifesting seemingly halfway and you walk around with your organs out all the time, or if it actually manifested completely and you were invisible forever. He was also able to transfer his invisibility field by touching someone else. He would go back to normal and whoever he touched was affected. And I do suppose in a battle situation that would be a good kind of like psych out tactic. Personally, I'm not used to seeing my organs, so if I were to ever grab this guy with malicious intent, seeing my internal organs would absolutely send me into a panic and he would win. I'm still confused though. Hector was one of the mutants that was depowered after M-Day, so he would have just returned to normal again. Very similar to Hector, the same but different is Glob. Glob is made of bioparaffin wax or living wax. He is a glob of it that commonly takes the form of a human body. The wax is flammable, so it can become a flame flaming version of himself. He can also fling bits of himself. I have to wonder about that one though. Are the bits kind of like fingernails? Like when I lose a piece of my fingernail, it will just grow back? I'm assuming because he is never lacking wax. He is considered invincible since his wax makes him resistant to damage. He once took a bomb for the Institute and came out fine. Tough kid. I would say that another one of his superpowers is that he's funny. Zorn is a confusing character overall. His origin was one thing and then it was another. He was actually Magneto. Wait, never mind. We need Magneto alive for something else. Okay, Zorn is actually real and also his head is a star. Sorry? What? Someone's head being a star? That's wild. It's a marvel he keeps that thing star even if it is just mini. Because it's a star, he could reverse the natural state of it to make a black hole. It also means he has magnetokinesis, or the ability to control magnetic fields. That's why he could fake being Magneto. The star also produces a blinding light because if you were to look him in the eyes, you would be staring into a mini sun. It can also incinerate you, so you will not make it out of there no matter what. He also, because his head is a star, doesn't need to breathe or eat or drink water. I've never got that in anything. If someone has a body, how is it sustained without those things? I don't get it, unfortunately. Give me a few days of thinking time, I will get there. Zorn is also a vibe checker. He knows if someone has passed in his general vicinity. I think it has something to do with the fact that he can feel the movement of energy and emotions, I think. Ice Cream, as a whole, I don't understand, but the powers especially. Ice Cream is a mutant that can turn into ice cream. Any flavor, he's not limited. It does have its benefits. Turning into a pile of ice cream means he can slip through grates and tight spaces. However, I can't imagine he is good on the offensive front unless his opponent is lactose intolerant. I suppose he could turn into ice cream and drown someone from the inside out, then that person would have to go to the afterlife with the story that they drowned from ice cream, and that's just funny or embarrassing. The last time I talked about ice cream, I mentioned that in addition to ice cream, he could even turn into a banana split. Someone commented on the video pointing out that a banana split isn't ice cream. You're right, I know that. That's why I'm so confused. Who came up with this? Ice cream has only appeared about like 2 times in the comics. I wonder why. Though he has limited appearances, that does not mean he has no fans. The additional confusing thing about him is he doesn't spell it I-scream with like the letter I, it's E-Y-E, and there's no explanation as to why that is. Soft Serve is a big fan of ice cream. Sometimes talking about certain characters brings me physical pain, and Soft Serve is one of them. Soft Serve is a mutant that poops ice cream. I hope no one is watching this video while eating ice cream. If you are, I'm sorry. Soft Serve can create any flavor of ice cream, and apparently it's actually pretty good. Forge tried it and said it was great. He definitely took one for the team. I don't think many X-Men are strong enough to do that. Obviously, the power is weird. It's weird, so how did it happen? It turns out that she isn't really using her own body to create the ice cream. Her body is actually a portal to the ice cream dimension. So the portal on her body just happens to be in an unfortunate location. Other than her being a big fan of ice cream, the pair are not related. Soft Serve also, shockingly, has only 2 appearances. Mystique has recently been revealed to be a gene shaper, not just a shapeshifter, which is very cool and very confusing. The difference, to put it simply, shapeshifters change their shape, they mimic someone else's look. Gene shapers become that person, rewriting their DNA until they are a copy. That's how Mystique was able to become Nightcrawler's father instead of mother. She gave herself male working anatomy. The thing that has fans wondering though is if she can become an exact gene level copy of someone, why can't she replicate mutant abilities? She can copy them, sure, we've seen that when she copied Wolverine's claws, but that was all surface level. She never actually fully gains the powers. It turns out that the reason might be simple, but also makes everything way more complicated. Mystique appears to currently be limited when it comes to mimicking the X gene. Regular genes walk in the park, she doesn't even need to think about it. It's the X gene that's tricky. Does that mean she can't? No, she probably can if we are being honest. Now that the big reveal of Nightcrawler's parents has been done, Mystique's writers have the ability to explore her X gene mimicking abilities.